Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, and today I'm joined by one of my business partners, Jim Willenbring. Jim brings extensive expertise and real-world experience in blending the science of effective people leadership with the real and messy work of leading people and driving business results. Jim, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here, Kaylee. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Me as well. And in particular, because we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. So would you orient listeners with what will we be exploring today?
Sure. When everyone starts out in their career, whether as an engineer, a scientist, a marketer, a salesperson, an analyst, they all get a view about what expertise looks like, right, as that individual contributor. And when you get promoted into management or leadership, what is that? What does expertise look like? What does being an expert leader look like? And I think there's a lot of opportunity to raise expectations, not only for yourself, but for others as well, and hold the space for that. And learn about not only what can be some higher expectations for myself as a leader, but what does it take to get there? And so that's what I would love to talk with you about today.
I'm looking forward to jumping in. What I appreciate about the topic is it's really treating leadership as a professional discipline.
It is. And oftentimes people get promoted because they're a great individual contributor. They become an expert in their area. And that can be really helpful, but also interestingly detrimental later, because there's a whole different set of skills that that individual needs to learn in order to be that effective first line manager, second line kind of leader, and even an executive over time. There's a different set of skills as you go up that ladder.
So I want to start with, how do most people learn how to lead people?
Well, I think it's by osmosis. They just like human beings. Sometimes it's don't do what I say. You do what they do, right? And so, just like as a parent, right? You've got kids. I've got kids as well, and so the that element around learning from your manager, right? How do they behave? How do they act? What are those lessons? I think people do pick that up by osmosis. But the challenge is actually what you're at risk of is learning not just what is good leadership practices, but what can be some bad ones as well. Yeah.
And you're also vulnerable to the level of leadership you're surrounded by.
That's right. And so at the Bailey Group, we talk about leveling up, right? And oftentimes leaders operate at one or two levels below where they need to be operating, right? And so you might have your direct manager, right, might actually be doing too much of your job, or your one over manager might be in the details, in the weeds, right, and they're not necessarily operating at that level, and guess what, that's a model for you to learn from, unfortunately. And there are some great leaders out there as well, in being able to be able to learn about a lot of things, so people can learn some lessons about what works well, but unfortunately they can also learn about what doesn't work well.
Yeah. And your thinking is really constrained to what you're surrounded by. So if you don't see it any different way, you don't know what you don't know.
Right. And that's why I think having people treat leading and managing people as a profession and as a discipline in and of itself, just like, if they got hired as an engineer, right? If they got hired in sales, in marketing, or in any other roles, right? As a counselor, whatever the profession is, right? That opportunity for someone to shift their mindset, right? And I think we'll talk a bit about lots of mindset shifts today, to My role is to be as good as I can be in managing and leading the business, managing and leading the team, right? And then managing and leading myself.
Mm. So practically speaking, what does it look like to treat leadership as a professional discipline?
Well, I think practically what it means to treat leadership as a discipline and as a profession in of itself. Um, for one thing, I would say is to have the same thirst to be able to get better at it and understand what are the fundamentals of leading at the right level and leading effectively and engaging my team on all the kind of skills and components underneath that. So I think part of it is both that thirst for getting better, which often for people who get promoted to different levels, is inherently there. There's ambition, right? That can be very natural. But it's that ambition about not just getting the job done. And I think this is one of the mindset shifts that I think people need to invite themselves into or lean into is part of their job clearly is to help their team and their organization get their work done, whatever that work is. Um, and the other piece of it that oftentimes they forget about is how do I develop the best subject matter experts on my team, or if I'm leading supervisors or people managers, how do I create the space and develop the best people leaders that I can in my organization as well? And so there's a whole, I would call it learning, orientation and mindset to leveling up, your leadership so that when you look at, let's say, you've got an employee and you're talking about a new project, and clearly you're talking about what are the deliverables, when does it need to get done, and all the practicalities of getting the work done. I think almost as important is the thought inside that leader that says, what are the learning opportunities? What are the development opportunities for this individual? How can I stretch this person, and how can I accelerate their growth so that they can grow and develop and be able to do this by themselves, right, in the future?
So, what are some of those fundamentals of really effective people leadership?
So the fundamentals of effective people leadership, I think, come down to a handful of primary ones. One is, can you plan and design the work, right? That's in front of your team. Can you get really clear about what the expectations are? Can you get really clear about who's doing what work? When does it need to be done? And then how do you hold the accountability space, right, for the team in order to do it? So I think that's often on the planning and the management side of things. And then I think so that's on the getting the work done side of the ledger, right? Um, I think there's often the further up you go in an organization, there's also the strategy. Why are we doing what we're doing, right? Understanding what the market needs are and the stakeholders and what's really important, and putting that strategy in place so that the work has the biggest opportunity to have the impact on the business or on your function as much as possible. Um, on the people side of the ledger, I think that's where I think we're going to spend a little bit more of our time today. On the people side of the ledger are things like how do I engage, right, with my team? And engagement is a broad word, right? How do I listen? How do I listen to understand, as opposed to listening so then I can think about what I'm going to be talking about next with that individual, right? How do I um, how do I ask powerful questions as opposed to giving them the answer all the time, right? And that gets to that learning piece of it. How do I motivate that individual? How do I understand what motivates them, and how can I engage with them in ways that can help them really be excited and motivated for them to do their work? Um, and then I think the last one is often about feedback. How do I give feedback? Both feedback around what they're doing really well and excellently so that they can do more of it in the future, but often face or confront, right, the most challenging feedback, right, which is how do I give somebody some feedback that might be difficult for them to hear, areas of improvement, that kind of thing. And that's so giving feedback, um, engaging, listening, asking questions, and having those difficult conversations, I think, are some of the foundational elements of managing and leading people.
Given your experience both working with individuals and also at scale across organizations, where do you see most people get tripped up when it comes to people leadership?
I see people getting tripped up when it comes to leadership in a couple of places. One is that they've been promoted because they're excellent at something, and they continue to play the primary role in solving those problems, right? And so that expert problem solver is highly rewarded in organizations and in the workplace, and so I think the opportunity is for people to shift that mindset from I'm the expert problem solver to I develop expert problem solvers, right? And even when you think even about an aspirational goal, imagine, setting a goal for yourself to say, I want to develop people on my team who are even better than I am in this space, in this function, in this area, that I lead, so that when a problem comes in, you've got a whole group of people, right, who are ready to be able to answer and solve the problem even better than you can.
You talked about the obstacle to shifting from being the expert problem solver to developing the expert problem solvers. How do you see people overcome that challenge? You talked about the immediate reward of being the problem solver. Practically speaking, let's say I recognize this pattern in myself and I want to overcome that. How do I do that?
So one of the ways to overcome that kind of expert problem solver mindset, really, and the challenge is it's a brain kind of neuroscience problem, right? Is we've been rewarded and developed really strong habits around problem solving, right? And so there's very strong neural connections in your brain, really fast ones and really strong ones, that really feed that expert problem solver in you. So it's hard. So you don't have to turn off that part of your brain, but what you have to do is really rewire and develop some other parts of your brain around. I would call it getting curious and asking questions. One of my favorite sayings is when an employee would come to me and essentially ask me a question or essentially ask me to solve one of their problems, is the saying, I have an answer, I have an idea for an answer, but I would love to hear yours first. And just simple questions like that, just that really orient the responsibility or even the agency for problem solving in the employee, as opposed to holding it yourself or reaching out and grabbing it from them, right? You know, I think is often it sounds really simple, right? And it sounds even simplistic, right? But what it does, just inserting that pause, because your natural response is to give them the answer, and to make sure that they're going to be correct in that answer. But it's really is to pause and say, I want to hear their idea first. I really want to be curious about what they come up with. And then the more you ask that question, guess what they're going to learn? They're going to learn to come in to that conversation with a couple of ideas, right? The first time you ask them the question, they're probably going to look like, a deer caught in the headlights, right? And say, oh, I didn't come in having thought about this because you usually answer my question, right? And so in this example, you know, give them some time or even tell them, I'm going to start asking questions more for the problems that you bring to me because I really want to hear your ideas. And I want to develop some of the problem solving capabilities with you as well.
That works phenomenal in parenting as well. I one time heard a saying that says we as parents sometimes rob our children of self-confidence by stealing it and solving the problems themselves
Right.
because it does make us feel good to
Yeah.
solve problems.
Right. Right. And there's clearly some questions where there's a single answer, right? It's probably quantitative, right? And it's a very simple thing to provide to that person. It's going to save them a lot of time, right? And so clearly, I'm not advocating for you not to give answers to the questions that your teammates come up with or your employees come up with, but but pick, a substantial number of those to really have them do some of that initial problem solving, initial thinking themselves, and even if they don't come up with the right answer, um, it's the exercise, right? The struggle, right? If you save them from the struggle, you save them from the learning, that element of it. Yeah, and if they come up with the wrong answer, guess what? You can say, you know what, I would approach it this way, right? And you give them the right answer, and then you say, let's talk about how I got there.
Yeah. And a lot of times in the world in general, in the world of business, there is not one right answer. And the challenge can be, I to your point, I have a way that I would go about solving it, and this is what my answer would be. But I want to hear your thoughts because I believe in your capabilities. And two of us together can probably come up with something better than what I myself could come up with on my own.
Right, and that's a great thing to add to this, because that if you come at it with some humility, that you don't have all the right answers, okay? Um, that concept around building on the ideas of others can be incredibly powerful, right? The 1+1 = 3 or 4, right? The that concept around what I like about your answer is this, and I would add to it this, right? Kind of piece of this, and all of a sudden you may end up in a place, where you're looking at each other, and you have this kind of shared creative solution to the problem that neither of you would have come up by themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also really love your comment about when you save them from the struggle, you often save them from the learning.
Right. And so sometimes one of the most powerful questions is silence. You ask a question and you hear or see them, and you just see it on their face, right? Struggling. And that feeling, that impetus to jump in and save them, right, from the struggle is just like palpable, right? And it's just like, wait, just tell yourself, pause, wait, okay, let them struggle a bit, and even name it, saying, you know, I see that you might be struggling with this. What are you thinking? Share it out loud,
Yeah.
right? Because they might want to feel, I got to give my boss a perfect answer. I had to tell her, that, the right answer that she's expecting. It's like, no, tell me what's on your mind.
Yeah. And that really builds trust.
It does. It does. And even, and so you think about these engagements and these opportunities to not only problem solve, but also one of those mindset shifts we're talking about is not just how do you get the work done, how do you develop the employee, but how do you build the relationship, right? And how do you increase the trust in each other, and in how you work with each other, and trust in their judgment, which clearly, if they're a new employee, is going to be hopefully moderate. It may not be low, but that's going to need to build over time, right? And so I think those elements around is seeing that interaction with the employee, not just as a transactional, how do we get work done, but that shifting towards how do I build and develop that employee, right? And then how do I improve the relationship going forward? And those are, so that to me, that's the essence of kind of managing and leading on a one-to-one basis between a manager and a leader and their employee.
So you talked about one of the ways people get tripped up when it comes to people leadership is essentially operating a level below where they really need to be operating by falling into the trap of continuing to be the problem solver and the go-to and the person who saves the day. What are some other places you see leaders get tripped up?
One of the other places I see leaders tripped up, I think, is to ignore the motivational opportunities in front of them. Um, I teach a class on coaching skills for leaders, and through the University of Minnesota, and I love doing it. And one of the things that I say towards the end of the class is that leaders have the opportunity to have a conversation that is life-changing every week, with the employee. And often the reaction of the participants is, that's pretty high expectations, right? And then my response is, well, I have high expectations because I feel you can meet them, right? So, it's such so. But even a saying like that, right? When you think about those kind of conversations, right? I bet you have some in your mind. I have some in my mind, and I think about that opportunity to be able to engage, to build trust, to connect, to have them feel supported. That there's all kinds of elements, right? And that opportunity to again work on the transactional elements and getting the work done element, but also treat them as a human being, and recognize that human beings are not just the logical part of our brain, but also what makes us especially human is our emotions, right, and our humanity. I'll share one example of a conversation that I've remembered, for all of my life is, and this wasn't even my direct manager, it's my one over manager, right? Who is the leader of a group of businesses, right, at the company that I was leading. And my father had been diagnosed with cancer. And so it was a difficult time, and he had approached me and essentially said, are you spending the time, that you want, with your father, in that period of time, and it was a fast moving cancer. And so we knew the prognosis wasn't all that great, but he said that to me, and this was, really meaningful to me. And then the interesting thing that he had, later, is that he followed up with me pretty much almost every week. Really, I would say to invite, well, I would call it hold accountability, right? For me spending time, with my dad, and in the limited time that he had left, and part of that is, he understood that this was a unique part of my life, right? And he also understood part of my personality was to go above and beyond, related to my work and my career, right? That element as well. And I was very conscientious and still am conscientious about meeting and exceeding expectations, right? And so he opened up a little relief valve here on the personal side of my life that was really, really meaningful for me, fundamentally. And then knowing that I might kind of swing back, right, towards feeling like I shouldn't be spending as much time right at home or in this kind of situation, he checked in with me to say, are you doing that? Are you following through with that, right? And it was incredibly meaningful for me. And so part of it is what was meaningful, why was that memorable for me? I think he recognized what was important in my life at that one time. And he created the space, right, and the expectation, and the okay, for me to spend the time that I needed to be able to be with my father, right, in the last month that he was there, so um so I think, when I think about that, I think, it's leaders recognizing the humanity, in the people they work with. And I think that model for me, was one that I learned from and tried to help create the space for other people, who I worked with, and who worked for me.
And they do say, one of the biggest retention and engagement tools is the quality of relationship a person has with their direct leader.
Correct. And so Gallup has done some wonderful research around, why connecting and engaging with your teams is important. They say that 70% of an individual employee's engagement, with their organization and with their job is due to the manager. Huh. And there's all kinds of implications of that. Okay, so let's say you have moderately or poorly engaged, people in your organization. So what? Well, the so what of that is you have a higher risk of losing them, right? So your retention is going to be lower. Productivity is going to be lower if we're not engaged. And overall well-being, fundamentally kind of health, whether it's mental health or it's physical health. That's a stressful situation, right? When they don't feel engaged and connected to their leader, to their organization, and to why they're showing up every day at their job. So there's lots of ways that translates. Then there's some other work that McKinsey has done around finding these really strong leadership characteristics like we've been talking about today, and how those leadership characteristics not only result in engaged employees, but then the result of a highly engaged team then leads to kind of higher revenue growth, higher profitability or net earnings growth, over time. And so they're able to look at where organizations have leveled up, their leaders. They find that actually translates to financial performance for the organization.
Mm.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to enhance motivation is another word that gets visceral reactions, feedback.
That's right. The interesting thing about feedback, is human beings from just a where we came from kind of perspective is we tend to pay a lot more attention. Evolutionary biology is the term, right? And we tend to pay a lot more attention to the negative things, whether it's about ourselves, whether it's about our environment, whether it's about other people, than positive things, right? Understanding that picking this color fruit, right, in the jungle, right, or in the wilderness, right, 10,000 years ago or whatever, understanding and being cautious and careful led to survival, over time. And so that's kind of hardwired into our amygdala, right, and into the parts of our brain, that really respond to those kinds of things. And so it's often really natural for us personally, for the judges that we have inside of us, in addition to how we lead teams, to really point out, everything that's going wrong. So I wouldn't do it exactly that way, right? All that kind of thing. And so there's the concept around, a 3-to-1 ratio, right? Is can you have a positive thought or positive feedback, at a ratio of 3-to-1 compared to, constructive criticism or negative feedback, going forward. And some people say, well, I just don't want to praise, things that aren't really meaningful, you know, but my challenge back to people is, do you think, your team is doing activities where they're making many, many more mistakes than they're actually being successful or demonstrating excellence, right? And so I think the opportunity around giving feedback, one is how can you deliver effective constructive criticism, and we can talk about that. But I think the biggest opportunity is to recognize excellence, and what I would call excellence in the wild. So, so Kaylee, for example, you are getting good at asking questions, right? And doing a number of these podcasts, right? And so what I like about the questions that you asked actually are they're often very short, but they're thoughtful and provocative. And so it really has me learning and thinking, about those questions. And they're often really meaningful and right in the middle of our conversation, right? And the topic we want to talk about. And so that feedback that I just gave you, okay, is specific, right? It's timely because you have been just asking questions here, right? And then oftentimes the really helpful elements is to get curious. How did you learn to ask those kinds of questions, right? And so that curiosity then often tells that person that you're paying attention.
Yeah.
And then it all often will take the thinking from implicits inside their brain and force them to verbalize it or invite them to verbalize it and turn it explicit. So all of a sudden there's learnings that are showing up, not just for me, but for that individual as well. And then that leads to them more likely to repeat that in the future.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. We want more excellence, right? In our workplaces and in our teams and our organizations.
I really appreciate the science of effective feedback, especially the point about it being specific. I think that was a big learning from me the first time I ever got really specific positive feedback. I had sent something to someone to get some feedback on, and the first sentence said, "It's really great." And of course, that feels good, but it's not super helpful, and it feels very broad, like anybody could say that. Did you actually read or not? And then the person went on to say, "Why do I say that?" question mark. And they listed off 5 or 6 very specific things that I would say were uniquely valuable about the work that I had done. And it makes you feel seen as a person. Um, it helps you build awareness around what specific gifts you might have, which is really helpful for you to bring out, because sometimes it's easy to assume that everyone, has those same gifts since you've been living that. Um, and it's really motivating. I can do more of this. It's confidence building.
And that right there is a conversation that you will remember for the rest of your life, that person gave you.
Yeah.
That was their, I got my tally for the week. I had a conversation that I had with somebody because I was specific with the feedback.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with you. Right.
You're spot on. I didn't think about that, but yeah, that has stuck with me for years and years and years and years and years and years.
And I don't know if you went home to your husband and bragged about that, but or maybe if he checks in at the end, how was your day? Oh, it was pretty good. Right. Because you're just feeling buoyed, right? All of a sudden somebody, it really, actually it's, there's people thanking someone, there's expressing gratitude, and then there's another level, which is really acknowledgement, right? Which is that deeper level, which really that manager, that person was acknowledging a core part of how you showed up, even potentially who you were, right? As part of that, right? And that kind of skill as a manager to acknowledge someone where they truly feel seen, right? I mean, that's magic, right? I mean, hopefully it's not magic, but you can learn how to do it, but it feels magical to the team that receives the acknowledgement.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so that motivational feedback, and that opportunity, if you actually train yourself to look for it, right? And to think about, what did I see excellence in the last 10 minutes, in the last 60 minutes, right? In the last 30 seconds, right? If you're in a meeting, right? That piece of it. Maybe in the last gave, that opportunity, right, is to be able to identify that, right? And so the interesting thing is when somebody does that, is, for example, in that example to you, Kaylee, what's the emotions that come up in you when that happens, when somebody does that?
A lot. Happiness, appreciation, um, excitement, optimism, hopefulness
And the excitement and optimism is for what?
for a new awareness that I've gained about who I am and what I bring.
Yeah. The word that comes to my mind as well is confidence,
Yeah.
right? Is that that excitement, that optimism can lead towards increasing someone's confidence, right? Absolutely. Because it just, because of that recognition of the job well done. And you think of all those words we just named, I mean, those are the ingredients, right, for engagements and for motivation. And that motivate, and that's really the outcome that you want to achieve, right, as a leader, is that connection with your team, that recognition of where's the good work that they do. And then sometimes a really challenging question that can be helpful at the end of that acknowledgement is, where do you see the opportunity to do this again? All right. And then there's this excitement to say, well, I could bring this to a team meeting this afternoon, right? Or I could apply this tomorrow, right? The piece of it, right? And so that just kind of feeds forward, that type of behavior in the future.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the constructive criticism.
Let's do
Should
it.
we talk about
I
that?
love
So there's oftentimes, in our work, we do a lot of personality assessments, right? And that the Hogan assessments, right, are fundamental to a lot of the work that we do. And there's a characteristic in a lot of people's personalities, that the category called interpersonal sensitivity, which is really about being diplomatic, being often pretty conscientious in how you connect and engage with others. You tend not to try to impose on other people. And so people who are wired with really high interpersonal sensitivity often can connect with others really well, but have a challenge or a hard time in having difficult conversations, right? And so the feedback, providing constructive criticism or negative feedback, can be really difficult for people who are wired in a certain way. I am 100 on the minor sensitivity score. And I own that, right? Which brings a lot of benefits to it, but it also brings some derailers or other kinds of things that can make that kind of feedback difficult. And so I would say for myself, negative feedback is never easy, but it's become easier for me over time because I've learned, how to do that. Some of those elements. So, one of the problems with negative feedback is people avoid it, and they push it off, and so something that happened today or yesterday, which is fresh in people's minds, they push it off until a week later or 2 weeks later until it festers, or they avoid it or ignore it, right? And so so oftentimes there's some data that shows that that people will, on average, avoid some difficult conversations for months, if not up to like 3 months or 6 months, like a certain percentage of people. And so when a manager avoids having a difficult conversation with an employee, I mean, what do you think the impact on that employee is and on the rest of the team is, related to that delay? What are your thoughts on that, Kaylee?
Well, the employee clearly doesn't know that there's anything wrong, so they're going to continue operating in the way they're operating. And the team is going to synthesize from the lack of conversation a tolerance around that type of behavior.
Right. And I would add to that, absolutely. And potentially a loss of trust or credibility in their manager or leader because they haven't had the conversation, and people know what's going on. It's your organization, right? Often better than the manager does, right? And so those conversations that are avoided just show up, right? And unfortunately fester, right? In the organization. So part of it, and there's a lot of different, conflict skills and other kinds of models and such, but fundamentally, what we had talked about earlier, are some of the same elements around that can be really effective for motivating feedback and positive feedback. You can apply on the negative feedback as well, which is get specific. If you heard somebody say something that had a really sharp edge and had a really kind of negative connotation or impact on others, write down what they said, right? Have not just for evidence purposes, but more for learning purposes, right? And so get really specific about what that is, because it's in the details that's often really helpful, around that. And so that getting specific, sharing your perspective, right? Often as the manager and leader is saying, here's what you said, right? And here's how I saw it, and here's how I experienced that. I don't know what your intention was, but I'm interested to learn is what's your point of view on that. So the other piece of it is share your perspective and then ask for theirs. And then the intention then is, once you listen to that and understand, kind of where they're coming from, share that intention, say, well, how do we problem solve this together? What are some solutions that we can think about, right? And now they may reject the need to do it, right? And so that's where your dialogue continues to go back and forth. But that understanding of get specific, share your perspective, get curious about theirs, right? And then lastly, really invite the problem solvers in both of you to say, how do we solve this together?
Same side of the table.
Right. Right. And clearly there may be certain solutions that aren't necessarily acceptable, right, or viable, right, related to it. And so there's a negotiation piece that goes in there. But there's an interesting element around think of the alternative, where somebody comes in saying, you did this wrong. Here's what the impact was, and here's how I need you to change it. There's so little agency in that piece of it. And if your objective is to change behavior going forward, that person, if you give them that directive, right, is going to come out of that, feeling, okay, yeah, I might have to do this because of my job, but I'm not going to be really engaged in doing it, as opposed to coming out with a solution that they've had their fingerprints on, is going to be much more motivating for them going forward.
It also feels very penalizing, like the person, am bad versus, hey, this behavior is an issue that we need to resolve.
Right. And I think you named something in that's really critical is providing feedback around the behavior or the action as opposed to the person. Right. saying, if you say to somebody, you are not clear, okay, and you don't communicate well, versus, you know, that presentation that you gave at the meeting this afternoon, I was confused in these 2 or 3 areas. So let's talk about that.
Totally different answers.
Right. And yes, that still might be a little difficult to hear, but all of a sudden my boss is not essentially criticizing me, and parts of me that I feel I may be effective at, or or I may be sensitive about, as opposed to, oh, there's some skills I can get better at, sure, right? And so here's some specifics about how to do it.
And I think the intention is really important too. If we can go into those conversations with the intention of, I care so much about this person and their potential and their growth that I'm willing to have the hard conversation or deliver the difficult feedback because I know they can take it and get better, right? That's a very different experience than, well, I don't know if they're going to change and I feel like I need to penalize them for screwing that up.
And I think what you just identified there, Kaylee, was this concept around sharing your expectations for that individual, right? So you can imagine if somebody hears something that says, you didn't do so well here in this experience that we just went through, last hour, but I have high expectations for you because I feel that you can meet those expectations.
Yeah, I know what you're capable of.
Right, exactly, and so that phrase, right? They've done some research on this actually. that people who receive feedback with that type of championing, right? Of that kind of high expectations, for you because I know you can do it. You found that many more of them followed through really around being able to improve that behavior and that skill, versus you did these 2 or 3 things wrong, and so I need to see those to fix those going forward, or else, right? I mean, there may be the consequence approach that you're talking about it. So, now you want to be authentic in those expectations. You can throw that phrase out with everybody, right, really frequently, but you also want to make sure that those expectations for that individual are valid, right, are true. So you have to be a bit careful about how you want to use that, but I think that's an element around putting those expectations out there, and I think that can be really that can be both. In the same instance, it can be both receiving feedback, about ways to improve, and motivating at the same time. There's another way to create a culture of favorable feedback, right, and a feedback friendly culture, which is as a individual employee, how do I invite myself and others to give me feedback about where I can improve? And so there's a I think it was Adam Grant who had essentially said there's 2 scores. If I may have gotten a 3 out of 10 on my performance in something I did here over the last, in the last hour or the last day, how do I get a 10 out of 10 in the way that I receive the feedback and act on it? Imagine that if setting that expectation for yourself.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
For those achievers, right, and our strivers, right, and among us, it's like, okay, how can I get a 10, right? And I can't get a 10 all the time, but how can I get a 10 out of 10 in how I listen for, receive, am open to, and actually act upon the feedback
Yeah,
later?
yeah.
And it turns it into a bit of a motivational game to yourself, going forward.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece of it is how the words, another way of delivering negative feedback to somebody can be the choice of words that you use. So, for example, there's the term of when I say to you, Kaylee, can I give you some feedback? What's your initial thinking or feeling when I say that?
I think that phrase in general is a really activating phrase. This is going to be bad. Oh no. What's going to happen? There's almost like a physical bracing of yourself.
Right. And if if you were experienced with me, let's say I was your manager, in giving a 3-to-1 ratio related to positive and negative, then you may not have that reaction in you, but your reaction is is really right on compared to, and I give you some feedback, right? Then what happens actually in your brain is it's almost an amygdala hijack. There's a threatening kind of component to that, because there's an interesting element around the sense of belonging, right? Human beings generally, we want to belong. Okay, we don't want to be othered. We don't want to be pushed outside, and so that oftentimes that feedback might feel threatening, right? And so therefore, it really appeals to a part of our brain, and really triggers that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn kind of reactions to it. And so when you think about feedback, sometimes you can use the word feed forward, right? I would love to give you some ideas for what to do the same next time because it went really well, or to do differently next time as well. And so the orientation is a little less about backwards. I mean, you're using that for learning, but it's oriented around practicing that behavior going forward. And just the tone of it feels a little bit different, a little less triggering, from your amygdala perspective and your brain.
So, Jim, we've been talking a lot about how becoming a leveled up leader requires more than just doing things differently. It's really about being different.
It is. Being a leader who's operating really at the levels that they really need to be in organizations really requires a number of mindset shifts, going forward. I think the first one is about shifting from the I'm the expert problem solver to my job is to develop expert problem solvers in the organization. I think that's one of the mindset shifts. I think the other mindset shift is clearly a shift from how do we get the work done to how do we get the work done plus how do I develop this individual? What's the learning opportunity for them? How do I accelerate their ability to be able to do this work next time? It's related to that developing expert problem solvers going forward. But when a leader looks at the interaction in front of them and the work in front of them, I think they need to think of three things. One is how do we get the work done, and how can I level up this person in front of me to be able to do more and more of that work going forward, and then how can I maintain, invest in, and improve the relationship between myself and that individual, or myself and that team. And so I think it's a combination of all of those, because at the end of the day, getting work done is part of our jobs every day. But we do that through developing expert people, and we do that through engaging and connecting and motivating our team and organization through the relationships that we develop. And so those three components, I think, are critical. And so that mindset shift around we get a lot of stuff done to that plus the relationship piece plus I'm always thinking about how do I develop, right? People all the time. I think those are the critical mindset shifts. And I think the other mindset shift that I think is critical for leaders is really one that invites them to be really present to the person in front of them, to show up and to be present to what is showing up right now. And I think that really gets to listening, right? I think that gets to the core element of really deep listening to that individual that really allows that manager to understand not just what they're saying, but what are they not saying? What are they saying through their facial expressions? What are they saying through their silences? And so that ability to be able to listen at multiple different levels and multiple different kind of modes of listening, I think is another mindset shift about, yes, I have an agenda and about a number of things I want to talk about with this individual, but how do I show up fully present to that person? And that's a gift in and of itself to that individual. It's a gift of presence. It's a gift of attention. And it messages an enormous amount of caring for that person. Just the act of listening. So I think that mindset shift is also one to shift just from, I would call it, the transactional kind of work, but also it invites the relational piece to it in as well.
Jim, thank you so much.
It's great.
Been a blast.
Yeah, it's been great to talk about this with you. I have a lot of passion in this area, and I know you do too.
Yeah.
It's so fun to talk about these topics of leveling up leaders to really the place where they can have the biggest impact on their teams and on their organizations, and then on themselves as well.
And thank you to our listeners. Join us next week for another episode of Leadership Matters.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.